And just logistics wise, if you can turn your video cameras on, that's great, because I can see your screens, and that helps me connect with you and support you and support your experience. So let's get started. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. I originally had this idea to share my journey of using culture models and what I've discovered along the way and how I've been applying them. And then so I kind of repivot that into a bit of a broader session, just what have I learned the last 12 years I've been working with culture, around culture. Now, of course, there's like a huge amount of stuff to share about this topic. Even in our 2-day training, can only share like a certain amount. So we're going to give you like really the condensed version of like the executive summary of using culture, and some very practical things that you can use in your work, in your organization, in your teams to affect change. All right, so let's dive in. So unlocking success through culture. Here we go. Well, first, a little bit about myself. Like, my original background is in engineering, and I then went on to do some artificial intelligence research. I did a master's degree and half a PhD until I stopped, because I realized I liked things to be very, very practical. At that time, a lot of artificial intelligence research was very, very theoretical in nature. I then moved on to get a job in the so-called real world as a developer, and then moved on to roles such as architect and lead. That's when I got involved with Agile. I actually started in 2000 with extreme programming, and started to realize, well, there are very different ways we can organize ourselves as human beings to create much, much better outcomes. I went on to get promoted and held management roles, so helping organizations evolve as part of the leadership system. And then I moved to working as a consultant and trainer, whereas working from the outside to help organizations. And then that's kind of where I had this big discovery. It's like, wait a second, like, unless I pay attention to culture and leadership, I really am not going to get very far with how well I can help organizations. That's a little about myself. So that's really why where this share is about what I've learned about culture and that journey. So I've written 3 books, or co-authored 3 books. Can everyone hear me? I just saw a message about audio from Frank. Yep. Thumbs up, people can hear me. Yeah, so Frank, maybe you want to restart your audio. All right. And really, I think probably this is more than what's in our book, Leading Beyond Change, but also or kind of a Reader's Digest version of what are the most important points to understand when thinking about changing culture. So I just want to go through and just say, like, the top organizational challenges are rooted in culture. By the way, logistics-wise, if you maximize my screen, I'll be bigger and you'll be able to read this better. So in the top right corner, you can go View, Speaker, and then that'll help you see better. So what are those challenges? Communication challenges, low engagement, hybrid or remote working challenges. That's actually, I'm seeing that increasingly with the clients that we work with, a lot of that coming up and being reflected in other ways, or attracting and retaining talent. Challenges adapting to change. And challenges creating alignment within the organization, and people just really feeling burned out or under a lot of stress. So that's a lot of the things that are happening inside organizations that are a challenge are actually rooted in culture. Now, if we go a bit deeper, we see that ultimately what's going on is people are getting disengaged, demotivated, disconnected from the mission, the purpose that they're there for. And that a lot of them fall into this trap, maybe not completely, but partly being this fixed mindset where they're not really open to growth. And when that happens, the system as a whole gets stuck, and it can't really evolve to serve its mission, build products, deliver, and so on. So we can say that performance depends on organizational culture. And why is that? Well, when you think about your organizational performance, that all depends on the functioning. Now, beyond tactics, if we look deeper, well, tactics are just sitting on top of our strategy, and our strategy is sitting on top of our culture. So if we really want to look at the deep roots of performance, of how to solve all of these challenges in a fundamental way, we really actually have to go to culture. There's no other place to go look. Sure, we can make some progress with tactics and strategy, but oftentimes if you've been involved with those initiatives, those problems just reoccur. We re-experience those challenges. Now, Drucker had this famous saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And although every business leaders aware of this phrase, this maxim, we're often not really clear or aware of how to put this into effect or what to do in our day-to-day job. So how did I get here? Well, I was helping organization after organization, mostly with agile, also some lean and other practices. I was just trying to help organizations be successful, and I noticed that there was always a limit to how much I could help organizations. And the limit was rooted in what was going on with the culture, what was going on with the leadership. If I was working in a system that was very open, when I got there, we could go really far. If it was very closed and shut down, I'd run up against a brick wall. And that's what really led me into this deep exploration of culture and leadership, to understand, well, how do we unlock those to enable our strategy, which enables our tactics, which allows us to deliver on our purpose, on our mission, create results, create amazing workplaces where people are engaged in firing on all cylinders. Oh, one more thing, logistically, if you have questions, just you can pop them in the chat. I can see the chat scroll by. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask via the chat. All right, we'll do a Q&A at the end as well. All right, so understanding and diagnosing culture challenges. I'm going to go through 12 years of learning. I'm going to talk about where did I start working with culture? What did I learn? How did I apply it? To give you a flavor of the different scope and range of possible tools. So the first thing I want to go through is the Schneider culture model. Now, in this culture model, it's a very, very simple model. It says, well, your culture can be more about collaboration. It can be more about control, keep things structured. It can be more about competence. How do we get things done? How do we be the best? Or it could be about cultivation. How do we learn and grow? Now, what I love about this model, this is my drawing of it, by the way, is it's simple to understand, and it's really easy to have conversations in the workplace. And what's lovely about this is there's no good, there's no bad, right? So it creates a very safe way to have a conversation about what's happening. Now, the challenge is almost every single organization that I've ever worked with, it's always about control. The biggest challenge is that organizations are too deeply steeped into control. We'll talk about that more, as why that's happening. So, and it's also very hard to action. You know, we can sign and say, well, your culture's over here. You know, maybe you should shift and move into adjacent areas to start exploring that. I mean, there are ways, but it's not very natural. It's not always obvious how those shifts will lead to solving the challenges that the organization experiences. Now, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to take you to an exercise and just ask you to, and this is actually literally what I did, or I did this with sticky notes or ask people to write. But just for now, we're going to go to this poll. What I'm going to ask you to do in this poll, these are a couple of polls that we go through here, is to click, what is the main focus of your culture? Is it collaboration, people working together? Is it a control, keeping things regulated, structures, consistent? Is it about competence, being the best? Or is it about learning and growing? So just take a moment to click. What is the focus of your culture? What is the focus of your culture right now when you think about the organization you're in right now? We'll just give people a few moments. Great, thank you. All right. Okay, so what are we seeing here? So actually, this is fascinating. It's not actually showing my screen. Aha, my polling software changed what they did. So I'll just summarize the results. There were actually 5 clicks in the control area, 1 click in culture, 1 click in competence. So what you're seeing here is that usually control is a dominant culture or maybe a secondary culture. That's pretty much what's happening in organizations around the world. So let's keep on going. Competing values framework. Competing values framework on the surface looks like a completely different model than the Schneider culture model, but it's actually pretty much exactly the same. All of these cultures here, collaborate, create, control. Oh, I can't read this. Compete, right? These actually fully map in. It's just that create and control are reversed because the axes are different. So there are many, many different systems that you can use to create this kind of dichotomy to understand, well, where is our culture? And very similar to the Schneider model, it's roughly equivalent. It has the same benefits, same properties. And you can do things like, where are we on each of these? And we need to grow our capability to cover off the whole thing. But here's the challenge with both this model, competing values framework, and the Schneider model. And this is a direct quote from one of the creators of the model, of the competing values framework. This is based on their research working organizations. It says the highest performing leaders have developed capabilities and skills in each of the 4 quadrants. So what they're saying here is actually like astonishingly important, is that if you actually want to be successful, to actually be fully successful, you actually need to transcend the whole system. So what it's saying is that a high performance doesn't exist anywhere except transcending these dichotomies, right? So this is a very, very powerful statement. A very powerful statement which goes, well, wait a second. If I really want to create high performance, if I really want to create a high level of organizational success, I actually need to transcend these dimensions. Okay, well, how do I do that? How can I move beyond these culture models? Now, I'm not saying never to use these. I'm not saying these aren't good. I'm saying they're actually very helpful for having a kind of a warm-up early conversation about what's going on with culture. But it doesn't give us the juice to really ignite people to say, okay, great, I want to make a change. Okay, great, I need to do something different to create a different outcome. So let's keep on going. The next model I'll talk about is spiral dynamics. And spiral dynamics, if you know it, is this very sophisticated, incredibly accurate, very complex model. And the main thing that I'd say it contributes to this conversation, that's been going on since the 60s, is that it gives us this individual and organizational dimension. So it says whenever culture is shifting, there's an individual dimension where people themselves are shifting, as well as an organizational dimension. Now, the biggest challenge with this model is just pure complexity. Like, people look at this and their brains blow up, right? It's not something that we can use in most organizations in any meaningful way because there's so much complexity, so much nuance. In order to understand the model, it's not very applicable. So great points on accuracy, low points on applicability because it's so complex. It's kind of a really good model to keep in your back pocket. As a way to reorient when you're kind of struggling and you want to understand the deeper subtleties of what's happening. So the other challenge I have it written here is the spiral wizard self-deception. So what happened is there's this whole notion of, well, all I need to do is become a spiral wizard and then I can master moving through these domains. But what that misses out is this huge important dimension is that most of us, because of how we grew up in society, are deeply conditioned to operate down here at the bottom layers. So there's no way we can actually operate as a spiral wizard up here, which is what the intention is. So the challenge I found with this model is it allows people to fall into a really deep layer of self-deception. So again, it's a really beautiful model. If with a significant effort, one can understand what's going on with it and use it, but it's not really useful with working with clients because it's so complex. We can use it in a back pocket for ourselves, but not really so much to help others. Okay. So the next model that I want to talk about is the modified Lulu model. And I say modified, and I'll explain what some of the changes are. Now, the way I've used this model, which is actually really, really helpful, is to really activate people's ego, people's desire to make things better, to create a successful outcome. And the ego's designed to do that, right? That's the fundamental nature of the ego is, what's this thing doing? All right, I think I've got a technical issue. I'm just going to restart my studio here. Hang on. Okay, great. Thanks. I'm back. All right. So let's keep on going. So let's go through what is this really about? Well, we can start to say, well, look, wait, all culture, this is what I love about this, like spiral dynamics, is all cultures are not equal. There's a fundamental difference in performance. I'll go back to spiral to illustrate this. There's a fundamental difference in performance as we move up. So as we move up here, we're getting to higher and higher levels of performance. Right? So that's another key dimension. So when we come to the modified Lulu model, at this point, it's a model that is easily digestible. that people can use on a practical basis that we can explain and communicate and use in daily conversation in a fairly accurate and precise way. So when we look at it, we can see an evolution from power and structure into achievement or organizations that run like machines, to people-centric cultures, to what we call teal. And this is, it created this whole industry of, hey, I want to go teal. I want to be a teal organization, right? Which is really fantastic. And it shows the power of having a very clear condensed model. Now, what is important to understand about this model, and this is the cause and effect, is we evolve people. The more people evolve and our organization evolves, the engagement and the outcomes increase. So for somebody here in a traditional organization, which can be red or orange, it's a way for them to get it and say, wait a second, oh yeah, if I go on this kind of journey, I'm going to create the business outcomes, the success that I hope for, right? So it's really, really powerful in activating the ego. So what's really good about it is that it's easy to understand and it creates desire. When I say easy to understand, I mean relative to, let's say, spiral dynamics, right? It's more sophisticated than a Schneider model or competing values framework, but not by very much. I mean, all we've done is taken the Schneider models and just redistribute them in a line, right? That's essentially all that's happened here. So if we look at the downside of this model, it's, go back to Lulu's original work. His original model actually ignored hierarchy. Hierarchy is actually a valid structure for teal organizations. And he actually ignored it because of his bias against it, even though the biggest case study in his research had a hierarchy. So what you'll see, and the reason I say modified, is what I've written here as a teal organization has shared power, has a decentralized network for decision-making, has emergence, self-management, and wholeness. This is my definition. This is not the original Frederick Lulu definition. If you go back to his book, it says something quite different. Now, the other challenge with it is that it's always a mix of stages, and we're going to demonstrate this in a moment. It's never, oh, we're at orange or green. So people get confused about these stages, and these stages actually get in the way of evolution. I'm going to repeat that. That's the major, major challenge here, is the stages get in the way of evolution. They go, well, oh, do I have to move to a people-centric culture before treating people like adults? And the answer is like, no. These are independent directions. So let's go to an exercise. And so this exercise is, I should drop this poll. Let's do the poll. What is the culture of your organization? What is the culture of your organization? And you'll see here that you can either click on a level, red, orange, green, teal, or in between levels. So just take a moment right now to think about, well, what's the dominant culture in my organization? Is it at one of these levels or in between the level? Or how is it a mix of different levels? And just pick whatever's closest. Whatever's closest. Oops. That's not very good. Just pick whatever's closest. So what we're seeing here is, again, apologies, my sharing software is not working properly. We're seeing answers here, 6 answers here, 1 here, and 2 here. So we're seeing mostly people are in this area, right, which is normal for organizations. And I want to keep you that in mind. That's normal. So we can see is that most of organizations are at lower stages of evolution, right? And it's really important to that. I see a comment saying mix of levels. Yeah. So what we're seeing is it's often mixed. So it's very confusing for people to say, well, am I this? Am I that? How do I grow? How do I evolve? So it's really beautiful for analysis to understand, well, where am I? But when we start to think, well, how do I grow? That's where people start to get somewhat confused. All right. So let's keep on going. So the next model, and this is the last model that I want to share with you about understanding the evolution of culture. This is what we came up with after looking at this for more than a decade. And what we identified is that the way to actually make progress on this is an ultimate dimension that we're moving from traditional ways of working in a Lulu model like a red or orange to evolutionary ways of working, or to green or teal or beyond. And that there are very specific dimensions to understand what are all the dimensions of culture that actually need to shift. Now, before I go into that, I just want to clarify some of the key points, which is that when we start to understand that it's a journey, we immediately start creating the possibility to say, well, where am I on this journey? Where is my organization? What do we need to look at to make progress? That's where the levels really help. You say, well, wait a second. The foundation is how we understand reality. How do we perceive and agree about what truth is? How do leaders show up? How is power exercised within the organization? How are people treated by leadership as well as each other? And what is our organizational culture? And how do we understand and approach change? And ultimately, how do we think about results and approach results within our organizational system? So the key benefits here are, get out of the way here. Key benefits here is that it captures key dimensions of culture, right? So it's finally a culture model that says, well, wait, these are all the dimensions that need to be considered for an evolution of culture to take place. The other part is this easy to assess. We say, well, 1 is very traditional, 10 is, evolutionary, like this, extraordinary organization. And we can understand that this evolution is a journey, right? This whole problem of I need to go to this stage, that stage is completely gone. And we can understand culture evolution as the ongoing journey, which it actually is. That's why having a defined transformation program is often not so helpful. The challenge, I'd say, using this is the reality in leadership as the foundation, down here at the bottom, because the biggest challenge with this organization is people are not ready to look at the truth of what's happening. And leaders are acting in command and control ways and are not aware of them and are not even really interested to change. So that's kind of a bit of the challenge, is that if you're looking for a model with leaders who are not really ready to grow or not ready to change, it might actually be better in some ways to go use the Schneider model. This model is designed for looking for places in the organization where, and we'll talk about how to do that, where there is a desire to change and support that cultural evolution journey. Okay. So let's do this one. Where is your organization? So I'm going to give you an example here. Where's your organization from traditional to evolutionary? 1 to 10. So 1's over here, very, very traditional, command and control. 10 is really, on the evolutionary side, very adaptable, people engaged, motivated, and so on. Just take a moment to say, where's your organization? Whoops, somehow got locked. Hold on. Yeah, okay, you can use it now. Apologies. Okay. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. So I'm actually going to see if I can do something different. Oops. That's the right button. Give me a second. I'm just going to see if I can actually pull up the data here. Yeah, let's pull this up if I can. Okay, here. I'm going to see if I can. Give me a second here. Pull this up. I just realized I can pull this up a different way. There we go. All right, you can see that. Ho ho! All right. So this is what came up. All right. So we're seeing most answers around 3, 4, 5. A few answers further on. Right. So now we can start to use this as a different lens to start to look at this. And what I've discovered is that even though there's a lot of detail here, most people can very quickly, easily grasp the key concept. Right? It's not, I mean, it's not that hard. Even for people without any culture background, it's actually a very natural concept where people get a sense of where they are in this journey. Right? So it's a very, very effective for getting a really kind of a rough read of what's happening within the organizational system. Okay. So let's keep going. So when we looked earlier, that's interesting, that's working now, okay. When we looked earlier at the very, very start of what are the challenges organizations are facing, communication, hybrid working, those are all here. If we look at the roots of all these culture, these problems only exist because leadership is not looking after the health of the system. They're not looking after the culture and ultimately not looking after the people. I'll give you an example. There's one organization I'm working with right now where they're very people centric. They care a lot about their people at an emotional level. They're there for people. But as stewards of the system, there's so many unaddressed problems that ultimately people are not being looked after. Like the cultures has some significant gaps. Okay. So what I want to do now is go into evolving culture, go through some keys and traps, some of the important things that I've learned. Let me just pause here for any questions before I go on, because that's what I want to do in terms of sharing the kind of the different culture models and the evolution over time. Any questions before I go on? All right, keep on going. So this is the universal challenge. The reason command and control keeps on coming up is because our society, our workplaces, our family systems, our school systems have a legacy of this industrial protocol of it all being about power. That's why this is the universal challenge we face in evolving our organizational culture. One dimension is that there's fear in our nervous system. Pretty much every single person on planet Earth has an overactive sympathetic nervous system. We've grown up in a world that's activated our fight or flight system, and we've created a society and workplaces and family systems that reflect that. And so in order to make a shift in culture, there's actually a reset needed in every human being's nervous system. And that's what really evolved leaders can do, is they can create an environment where people can recover and stabilize themselves where they can actually perform. The other dimension that we can say here is the ego. Ultimately, this journey of letting go of command and control is discovering our ego and how our ego is actually taking us out and where we're unaware of the damage that we're causing to those around us. So if we look at that, there's these fundamental shifts in the fabric of human beings that underlies the shift in culture. Now, really evolved leaders who are able to create culture shift, they've made huge progress. They have a huge sense of psychological safety, and they've gotten their egos out of the way. They have an extraordinary high level of humility. But this is ultimately the challenge that we're working through. Now, our view, and this has changed over the years, is that, look, culture change is hard. Why don't we start with the easy stuff? Why don't we start with the traps that we're doing that we may not be aware of, that are bringing us back to more of a traditional organizational system, and start to become aware of some of the success patterns so that we can start using more of them to operate more healthy. And what's really important about this is not just about saying, hey, leaders, this is what we need to be doing. It's more about, hey, let's start be aware of what are we doing right now that's not serving us, that's taking us back to a traditional organization. So we need a mix of both letting go of the old and inviting the new. But we can start with the easy stuff. Instead of saying, well, I need to work for my ego, I need to change what kind of leader I am, blah, 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 lead by example. Instead, we can actually just start leading as a different kind of leader by focusing on the low-hanging fruit, tactical daily changes to what we're doing. Whoops. So that's why we say start with the tactics. There's lots more on the journey of actually creating a shift in culture, but we can actually start with the tactics to get an immediate shift with low effort. That's really the focus of our work, is how do we start to do that? The other thing I'll say is that culture is a local phenomenon. Culture is a local phenomenon. What I've done is I've kind of illustrated this with kind of more red or traditional culture and pockets of more evolved culture, right? So when you think about all the organizations you've worked with, they've never been consistent. So what this tells us, that when we want to change culture, it's not about trying to change the whole thing. It's about working with individual leaders to create little pockets of change. So the technology here, and we've got blog posts on this as well as in our book, is to use culture bubbles, to understand that the only way to create culture is by changing it locally, and to focus on leaders creating little bubbles of more progressive culture and building adapters so that the bubble can coexist with the rest of the culture system. So that's really, really important, is to start focusing on change where change is possible. Now, we can then go on to clarify that culture is 100% a reflection of leadership. I'll repeat this. Culture is 100% a reflection of leadership. not 95 or not it's important. It's fully a reflection of leadership, because leaders hold the power in what they allow to have happen, whether they've inherited or created it. They're choosing to keep that that way of functioning intact. Right? They're choosing to allow the behaviors that are happening with the people who report to them stay intact. Right? It's a choice. So that's why we say culture is a reflection of leadership. If you think about the saying, people don't quit the company, they quit their boss. Right? That's showing you very directly that culture is a reflection of leadership. And it's a local reflection. So every manager, everyone with authority, every technical lead, every design lead is a beacon of culture. And everyone's leading by example all the time. We're just leading it as an example towards a more traditional culture, or we're leading by example to more evolutionary culture. We're doing that 24/7. Every single person with authority in our organizational systems. So if we think about this, and I'm going to go through a map we created called the evolution of high performance, is that every organization wants the results, the business agility, the ability to thrive in a VUCA world, engage workers, and so on. That depends on new ways of working, whether it's agile, digital, and that success in turn depends on the health of the organizational environment and culture. When we have a healthy organizational environment and culture, the people in our organization can adapt to new ways of working that allow us to deliver on the business results. And leaders are the ones creating that organizational environment and culture that determines this foundation of what happens within the organizational system. So from that perspective, that's why we say culture is 100% a reflection of leadership, or the output of the organization is not a reflection of all the workers. It's a reflection of the leadership and the system that they're creating. So what does it actually take to create evolutionary change? What does it actually take for somebody to lead this journey from a traditional organization to an evolutionary one? There's a lot of details, but I'm going to give you this high level kind of sense. There's a shift in what we do on a daily basis, as well as a shift in our state of being. In a traditional world, as leaders, we're operating from stress and pressure, fear, impatience, judgment, thinking I'm right, looking smart. And the transition is in our state of being to being peaceful and calm, intrinsically having a high level of psychological safety, being patient with the rate of change, having compassion to understand it's not anyone's fault. It's just this, societal wide challenge that we're all working through together, to being curious about what's happening and have humility. Right? And so when we start to look at this, and this is earlier I made this comment about spiral wizard deception. When we start to look at this and we're really honest with ourselves and we admit ourselves the truth inwardly, we can just say, well, wait a second, I'm not here. I'm not here. This is like a star on the horizon maybe for me, but I'm somewhere on this journey. So how can I possibly create a better future, a better functioning organizational system if I'm not operating in a way to create a container where I can bring that out in people? As I'm conditioned by the world and I'm operating in this way, ultimately, that's what I'm creating. And this is like the really hardest thing. So this is actually the key starting point, is when we can be really honest with ourselves of what we can create, and just focus on working within our culture grade of how far on the journey can we really help people. That'll help us be a lot more successful using what we have in the way we're functioning. And also just make sure we're doing all the tactics, the traps and the success patterns that we can use as a way to kind of bootstrap ourselves into a healthier place. What we're talking about is the evolution of servant leadership, what we call evolutionary leadership. And this is really what it takes, right? If you're not doing this, there's no possible way you can actually lead culture change within an organization. Evolutionary leadership is the choice to evolve oneself and develop the capabilities needed to evolve an organization. This is what it takes to be a so-called spiral wizard, or what it takes to lead evolutionary change in a profound way. Of course, we can get started with the tactics, right? Let's get started with the tactics and avoid the traps and so on. But to go further on the journey, this is what's required. A shift in what we're doing on a daily basis, how we're interacting, and a shift in our state of being. From frantic and busy to just actually just very calm, stable, present with people, listening to them, supporting them. So this is like a very controversial piece of advice and a learning for us, is that leaders go last. You're saying, well, like, Michael, what are you talking about? You just told us leaders go first. The culture is a reflection of leadership. Yes, and top leadership of your organization is going to go last. Why? Why will top leadership go last? The reason top leadership is going last is because they are the most stable. They have, usually there's a generational thing that, for them, changing is much harder than it is for a younger person who's a millennial or a Gen Z, right? Younger generations are much more wired for a higher performance culture, much more wired with less ego. That's kind of the competitive advantage they have. So top leadership usually go last. So what does that mean? It means that when we're approaching change, what we focus on is where, I've got it right here. Okay, that's good. We focus on where in the system is there a leader, or where in the system are there leaders who are ready to evolve. So the fact that top leadership of your company is going to most likely 90%, 95% is going to go last, because of the magic of culture bubbles, we can look for where are those leaders who are ready. And what happens is when we help these leaders go ready, eventually they'll get promoted and the culture bubbles can grow in a much larger way throughout the organization. Right? This is in parallel in academics with Kuhn's theory of scientific revolution. For science to make progress, we had to wait for the old professors to die off. So the new professors who were open to new ideas could bring those ideas and be in charge and actually teach people what was going on. So that's ultimately what the most likely pattern is for our organizational systems. And I'm not saying this with any judgment or frustration. I'm just saying, look, this is just like kind of the facts of what's happening out there. And when we're aware of that, we can just focus our energy on where we can actually create impact. So leading evolutionary change, there's a lot to say about this. I just want to touch on this briefly. When we focus our attention on how do we create people who are theory-wise, engaged, motivated, passionate, and we focus on, at every moment, in every single interaction with people, how do we create higher levels of psychological safety for them? How do we, not take away, basically not falling the traps of disempowering them and so on? How do we focus on creating changes based on desire? That whole pattern from Cotter of creating urgency just activates fear and actually kills effective change. So how do we activate people's desire to actually create change? Well, we start by listening to them. We start by asking them what they think is important. We say, oh, that sounds great. Why don't we work on that? And we let go of our agenda, what we think is important, to help people and meet them where they are and what they need right now. And of course, we start to move in this pattern that there's this experiment and learn cycle, that we're dealing with a complex environment. So of course we need to use a different pattern than a rollout plan to approach change. It's going to be emergent. It's going to have learning. It's going to be messy, because that's the end state we want to create. We want to create a learning organization that tries things out and experiments and learns as it goes. The only way we can get to that kind of organization is we use that approach now to get there. Right? And of course, I'm not saying that you should run experiments or tell people you're running experiments. If they're coming from a traditional culture system, that's when you use the culture bubble. They may not be able to handle that. You tell them, hey, here's the rollout plan, but under the covers, you do what you need to do to learn as you go and help that system evolve in the only way that it can. So one case study is with a media group I worked with, and this is the engagement score from the Gallup. So it's a very, very good proxy for the overall culture, the organizational system performance. And now this might seem like a very small shift, but for going from Q1 to Q2, when they got to here, there was an audible team buzz on the floor, like people talking to each other and so on. And quarter by quarter, this is what the leadership team did on their own when they chose to step into stewardship of their organization, to make it a priority for them, not just to get projects done, but to support that organization's system's health and growth. All right, and then if we go on further, after another 2 years, they got to a 1.2. And so culture change is 100% achievable when you have a group of leaders who are making that their choice. And they're trying things out. They're focused on desire. We can go back to this leading evolution change. When leaders have adopted these practices of focusing on healthy ways of engaging with their group, they're part of the organizational system to affect change, then change will happen over time. It's inevitable. So my key message is that it's a journey. It's a journey. It's not a one and done. It's not a transformation program. It's just a choice. Am I interested and committed to helping my organization evolve? If you're interested in continuing the journey, I'll just share a bit more before we open up for questions. So if we look at this map, tradition to evolutionary, everything we're sharing is part of this Shift 314 evolutionary leadership framework or self framework. So this is what we created as a coherent way of looking at and understanding how do we evolve our organizational DNA. If you want to go deeper, there's a QR code here. You get the book. It's actually, you can see this one of our graduates' work. They actually realized it's a daily field guide for how to function in a more evolved way to create a more evolved outcome. Another option is our certified agile leadership training. We're in person around the world, and we have one virtual North American class. And this is where we go through in detail what are the traps, what are the success patterns in great detail to give people that immediate boost to where they're functioning now on their evolutionary journey. We also have our Academy of Evolutionary Leadership, which is where we go into the heavier stuff, the ego, the conditioning of our nervous system, and that's why it's residential, to help people come out of the matrix. If you're interested in having a conversation of how we can help you from a consulting and training perspective, happy to set up a conversation with you. Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So that's all I wanted to share. I'm going to open up for questions now. And actually, I saw I missed a question in the chat because something went wrong with my chat. It's from Alex. If you find it useful to score each of the dimensions of the culture model to find areas for growth. So Alex, are you referring to our model, tradition evolutionary? Or what are you referring to?
Yeah, this one behind you.
Yeah, so actually I wouldn't. I'd actually just focus on the foundation of understanding of reality. Like just really, really focus where our leadership and ready to acknowledge the current organizational state, right? And if they're too busy, it means that they don't want to know, they don't care, right? They have other priorities. So that's actually the foundation, because everything else won't matter. So I focus, instead of where are we in scoring the dimension? Okay, I'm gonna go back up. The most important thing is that you people say, yes, we are ready to do things differently. And yes, we're ready to do that on a daily basis. You can call that a learning culture, right? It's saying, I'm gonna shift from my day-to-day job of getting product out the door and dealing with emergencies to like, yes, I'm gonna focus on how do I create a better environment for my people. When you have a leader or a group of leaders focused on that, change will happen. That's why I say the foundation is the most important dimension. Then all the other dimensions will start to evolve from that. In terms of assessing where you are, who wants to know where you are? All you need to know is, well, how are we stand in the truth? I'll move out of the way here a little bit. If we want to get further on the journey, we have to unlearn our preconceived notions, be more aware and conscious of what's happening around us. And as leaders, caring for people, leading by example, and focus on our own self-evolution. When we do those things, we're going to see progress. When we do those things, we're going to see progress. So if we want to create progress, all we have to do is say, well, what are we seeing right now? And do we want to make it better? So this notion of, well, where are we? Well, who cares where we are? That doesn't matter. If I'm a leader and I want to make my department better, then I do that. So who's asking, where am I? So I can feel good about myself and so on. But I feel good when I've shifted this mindset because I'm looking after my people, because I'm making a difference in their lives, because our products are becoming remarkable, because now we have a remarkable team creating remarkable products. And that's the fuel that sustains the journey. If you want to use a metric, one metric that's useful is the Gallup 12 questions, because that's statistically linked to business unit performance, right? So one leadership team did that quarterly for themselves, and they were like, like crack junkies waiting to see what their scores were to see how did they do, right? And so that's a good feedback mechanism. Or we use the organizational performance index. We put that on comparative agility. I think that's free to use for about 30 or 40 people. And then we also use that, as well as we have an evolutionary leadership index, which is an index that looks at where leaders that we use with the clients we consult with. So, but really, it's just any really metric that you use that's anything meaningful about performance will show this kind of progress. Yeah. So any other questions? You're welcome to unmute and ask your question, or ask via the chat. Oh, I see there's one here from Mally. How does an organization, group, or team get to the point that they say, yes, we already do things differently? That is such a good question. What do you think?
Well, can you just beat them into submission?
Well, see, when we beat people into submission, that's what we'd like to do. That's what we're trained to do. That's using a command and control pattern to create the outcome. I know you're joking, but right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So what do leaders over here do? Instead of talking, what do? We listen. We listen. And this is a whole other talk. This is a whole other aspect to the work, which is when we start to really listen to leaders about what they want. Hey, leader, what does success look like for you? Great. How do you think we're doing around that now? Great. Do you want to put time and effort, energy in that? Great. I mean, it's like literally that simple. Like, what do you want? Where do you think you are towards attaining that? And do you want to put effort in? It's the same question you can ask any team. It's like, hey, team, how are you performing from 1 to 10? How would you like to be performing from 1 to 10? Are you ready to put, how much effort do you want to put into getting better? Okay, great. Now you're off to the races. Whether you're working with a team, the principles are the same, right? What we're doing is we're rehabilitating ourselves to move out of our command and control mindset to learning how to lead through influence, to create change with people, which is, of course, and we've been raised in an entire society where we've been conditioned to operate over here. So it's like really kind of weird, but that's where we want to go through the traps and the success patterns to start getting that scaffolding to help us start to make healthier daily choices. Is that good? Ali, is that good? Yeah, okay. Other questions? Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure sharing the space with you. Really appreciate your involvement and your questions. So have a great day, and thanks so much. I'm going to stop the recording.